Awesome. There's in the top right, if you probably have all used Zoom. Ooh, I want to go to the beach.
Yes. Oh my God, me too. Right, just getting situated here.
Perfect. So if you probably all use Zoom, but in the top right-hand corner, you'll see there's something to click for speaker view or gallery view. So right now I have it on gallery, so let's just kind of go around in a circle and introduce ourselves. My name is Melanie Bertrand, and I've had the honor of going along in this journey with Kristi and being her dissertation chair. And let's see, for me, Lindsay is next on in the list here.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I'm Lindsay DePold. I'm a clinical assistant professor in our higher education program at ASU, and happy to be a committee member for Kristi.
Wonderful. And for me, Lauren is next.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I was Kristi's intern for this past semester, and we worked on the Instagram page with her, and I'm so excited to see her.
Awesome. And Ethan.
Hello, I'm Ethan. I'm Kristi's other intern from the past semester.
Nice. Great to meet you. And Brooke.
Hi, everyone. My name's Brooke Foucault-Wells. I'm an associate professor of communication and network science at Northeastern University. I'm a member of Kristi's committee, and we met through a mutual connection at Northwestern, where I did my PhD, and she was at least located for some of the time that she was doing this work.
Mostly.
And Joe.
Unmuting myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Salcedo. Formerly, I've worked, when I met Kristi, I was working with the Department of Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs at Loyola University of Chicago. I'm thrilled to be part of this and to see you. So.
And Tasha.
Hi, I'm Tasha. I'm a graduate student at ASU. I met Kristi at an event and interested in a topic.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us. I want to give a special thanks to the committee. Thank you so much, Drs. DePold and Foucault-Wells. I appreciate you so much. And thank you to the rest of the folks who are here. I mean, you know, what an amazing group present here. And I know that everyone contributed to Kristi's amazing dissertation in different ways, and so I'm so thankful, and I'm sure she is too. So just to give you kind of an overview of how we're going to go forward, we're going to go for a maximum of 2 hours. So in Arizona, that's until noon, and I think for some folks that's until 3 or 2. It's depending on where you live. So first, Kristi's going to do a 25-minute presentation of her dissertation. And then we're going to open it up for comments, questions, and feedback. And then for those of you who have never been in a dissertation defense, what happens is, well, if this was live in person, usually what happens is that the committee members ask everyone to leave the room, including the person who's defending the dissertation and anyone else other than the committee members. And so it's just the committee members sitting in the room talking about the dissertation, what changes we might want to see, etc. And then we bring everyone back together with final results and steps forward. Any questions on the process? Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. Oh, I did want to say that because of changes related to the coronavirus, and ASU changed its policies related to online dissertations. So usually the Zoom account is through my own Zoom account, and I record and I'm able to upload it for for Kristi to view. But in this case, what's happened is that it's the doctoral program account that we're on right now. And so the recording started as soon as I entered the room. So we're actually, the whole thing is being recorded, whether we like it or not. And so, and then once that's all done, it'll be edited, and then Kristi will be able to view it, and it'll actually be public. So anyone will be able to view it, including everyone in this room. So without any taking any further time, I want to turn it over to Kristi for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is, it means a lot to, I know like my committee members have to be here, but I'm also very glad that you're here, and I'm glad that everyone is coming to listen to my dissertation defense. I tried to cut down on the amount of time it would be, and I feel like in that effort, I may have made it longer, but we're gonna see how this goes to get in the right amount of time. Okay. Now let me check really quick. Is everyone able to see it yet? No? Okay.
No.
No, not yet.
There it is.
We're good? Okay. So welcome my defense. It's titled Spreading the Wealth, the Influence of First-Generation College Students and Network Counter-Storytelling on Social Capital Theory and Practice. I want to begin by presenting two different quotes that I feel like really represent the crux of my dissertation. The first comes from a recent publication by Hamadani and Marcus that explained that US higher education reflects and promotes assumptions about what it means to be smart, educated, and successful, and that these assumptions are not neutral, but are powerfully shaped by white, middle to upper class beliefs, norms, and values. And then in contrast to this, we have this quote from a student from our campaign who said, "I began to explore what it meant to be undocumented in America while also being a woman of color and working class and first gen and all the other identities I hold. Now that I'm in college, I see my identities as my assets. They are my superpowers." So to give some context and the problem of practice being addressed, I'm focused on first-generation college students. They make up around a third of the student body in higher education. That's a very loose number because the definition of first-gen students varies. But a very unsettling thing is the graduation rates between first-gen students and their non-first-gen peers, which for first-gen students of low-income backgrounds, it's 14% compared to their peers, which is 68%. There's been a growing push in research and practice to focus on social capital and the influence that has in helping to sustain first-generation students at college. This can include creating mentorship programs, advising services, and different affinity groups for students. However, there is bias just implicit within a higher education system that is manifest in different ways. First, it means that in academic research and in the structures of higher ed, that these things are shaped by racialized, gendered, and classed assumptions, including additional ones beyond that, but those are the primary three that we address here, that I address here. It assigns expertise to those who are at the center, who hold traditional forms of power, and it dismisses the leadership and perspectives and voice of those on the margins. The consequences of having this implicit bias in academic research is that we have a very narrow lens that shapes theory and research, where we only take one viewpoint and not necessarily another. And that in turn can create deficit-based ideologies around difference and create education practices that reinforce that. And then that in turn lays the crux of these design errors, this implicit bias, on those who are experiencing the oppression that comes from that they have to deal with that, instead of necessarily, looking at the design like this stairs to a garage door and seeing maybe the design is the problem here. Now, we've seen how fresh perspectives in academia have changed theory. I have here pictures of some incredible thought leaders, Baldwin, Cremere, and specifically Yoso, who I focus on here, who she brought the critical race theory perspective to social capital and community wealth. And through these fresh perspectives, we were able to reframe and change how theory was used, and then that affected research and practice. Many of these people that I just shared were first-generation college students themselves. So there's this idea that if we have these fresh voices in research and in academia, we can have more novel and theoretical lenses in which we do research, and that would in turn create more equitable research and practice. There's some examples of that. There's some studies from a professor I worked with at Northwestern that did difference education interventions where they leverage student voice. Dr. Bertrand does a lot of research in YPAR, which is really leveraging the power of student leadership in research. And there's examples of digital activism like network counterpublics that Dr. Foucault-Wells does. So the problem of practice is that there's this bias in higher education, and the research that we have on social capital and first-gen students is being built on these biased and narrow theoretical lenses. So the intervention that this research implemented was network counter-storytelling, meaning that we leveraged network technologies to create a space for student voice, their leadership, and their activism in order to be involved in the research process. The guiding theories of my research, I took two aspects of social capital. First, I focused on the structural components of social capital presented by Lynn. He had three main elements. So for him, social capital was the resources first that are within a network, one's ability to access those resources, and then finally the ability to mobilize your network to use those resources. The other framework that I used within the social capital umbrella was community cultural wealth, which I said earlier, Yoso presented. In that, she presented these 6 forms of capital that are held by communities who are typically pushed to the margins of their organization or society, and how they use that as a source of strength. And then finally, I'm presenting this new form of this new theory, network counter-storytelling, which is a merge of Solorzano and Yoso's counter-storytelling and network counterpublics. And this is network counter-storytelling, and it's using these network technologies to be able to shape a larger community narrative that is owned by those sharing the stories, and be able to build social capital and transfer that capital. My research design, when I looked at this, it kind of was bringing together these 3 different aspects. It was taking student voice, digital activism, and the leadership of students, and combining it into a social media campaign, which we're calling here the network counter-storytelling campaign. And in that, we were able to leverage this technology, amplify student voice, and create space for students to be involved in the research process. The phases of the research. The first phase was recruiting a campaign team, which I am so honored to be able to have my 2 team members here, Ethan and Lauren. Through the support of Joe, he was able to connect me with a group of first generation and students of color at Loyola University, though I'm calling it Midwestern. I don't know how, this is hard because they're here right now. But we recruited from their program, and Ethan and Lauren opted to volunteer and run the campaign alongside me. That was last spring. And then over the summer, I started to record interviews with some alum from that program, and in order to create podcasts. And then we worked together to figure out which social media sites we wanted to use. The intervention portion of this research took place in the last fall semester, where we launched the campaign. And in that process, we had weekly, or we tried to have weekly meetings where we would come up with content for the campaign, come up with ideas of, you know, what type of values do we want it to hold, what was the mission and goals, and just an iterative process of making the social media campaign. And then the last phase was these last couple months was doing a final analysis of the data that I collected. So I shaped the research questions on these 3 forms of theory. For structural social capital, I wanted to know how within the Instagram campaign could we measure those 3 structural components of social capital. And then I also wanted to know, in this larger narrative that was created through the campaign, how did students talk about social capital? I also went through that larger multimodal narrative and looked to see what aspects of community cultural wealth and capital came out. And then finally, I wanted to understand how students viewed this entire campaign, network counter storytelling, and the campaign we created. I used a concurrent mixed methods approach where I collected both quantitative and qualitative data along the process and analyzed and then triangulated that data to find results from the research. This is a really helpful method if you're doing action research or participatory action research where you're working together. It's also very effective in social media studies. And now let me go through some of the methods. So first, in order to study the structural social capital, I did a network analysis of the Instagram account campaign that we made. Some of the ways that I did that, because we owned the account, I was able to pull, I used all data scraped on my own. I pulled it from our own account, also from free sites like our free platforms that are available to Instagram, which is Instagram Insights and Creator Studio. And then finally, I just kept track of data throughout the whole process and kept it in a Google Excel spreadsheet. So findings for research question 1, I wanted to know these 3 forms of capital. First, we needed to find a way to measure that. And by we, I mean I already have a problem saying that. So what I did was I operationalized social capital through storytelling. So stories became the resource. And in that sense, there were both the stories themselves, direct, and storytellers, so the people who held those stories. Access was an individual's connection to the stories or storytellers, and the mobilization was how individuals could engage with those resources. Using Instagram metrics, I was able to group these into different categories. So I'll go through each type. So the resources, we measured both the real and the potential resources, which is a part of the definition, Lens definition of social capital. The direct resources were posts in the Insta stories. Indirect resources were followers. And we found, as I analyzed, we had 41 different posts and 88 Insta stories. From looking through those, there were 3 main themes of what those stories were serving. First, it was a chance to share actual stories, firsthand stories from students. I didn't get a chance to reach out to the students, see if it was okay to use this picture, so we have an emoji smiley face. We have, they were also used to make a commentary on higher education or on their experience. And finally, stories were used to promote the values of the campaign, which included ideas like community cultural wealth and intersectionality. Followers, there were 113 followers over the process. A few of the followers dropped, but this was the total number. And then took 3 different time increments across the campaign, about a month apart, and measured who followed the campaign, how large were their own networks, were they private or personal accounts, and how closely associated were they with the Instagram account. And we can go into that more detail later because it's going to be long. Access, I created some novel ways to evaluate access. A lot of these I haven't provided the statistical analysis yet. It's something I want to do, but most of the process was being able to identify ways to measure these. So we were able to measure access through the metric of reach, how many unique accounts were reached by each post. This is an example of the reach of the different posts over time. And as you can see there, it varied dramatically depending on the post that was put out, how many accounts were reached. What I wanted to follow up more, it was to see would reach of an individual post affect the connection to indirect resources, to other followers and their engagement. So we showed the reach for each post, and then what type of indirect resources were connected to each post. Like, were there more people who followed, who commented? Were there outside likes that weren't necessarily followers? And then finally found metrics to measure what could facilitate reach, which included hashtags and mentions. Mobilization as well. I use the metric of engagement to see how much unique accounts engaged with the posts that were made. And so I tracked this along with reach, and there was a very close association between that. Again, I haven't put the statistics up yet. And then I wanted to be able to better understand how they mobilize these resources. So first, I identified more active forms of mobilization. So that included making comments or replies, shares or saves of the accounts that required additional action by the user. And then this also included follows of the account or visiting the website that we created. And then there were more passive forms of mobilization that included doing a post like or a like on a comment or just clicking to see the profile. Okay, now I want to talk through how I addressed research questions 2, 3, and 4, which was viewing this larger multimodal narrative. The methods for this was using an ethnographic analysis. So first, identified just the larger, used a large net to find all the different stories that were connected with the campaign that we created. And from that initial compilation, we had about 204 different stories. Those go through an ethnographic screening where you use a metrics provided by Causanets to determine the relevance of those stories to the research question you're trying to address. And so through that, then it was narrowed down to about 151 stories. And then finally you do a duplication check to see, or I did a duplication check to see if there were any repeated stories where it was the same person sharing a narrative but on different places. And through that, I ended up having 106 total stories from unique perspectives that were used. These were then viewed through a quasi-grounded theory approach. I wanted to be able to let the students' stories be able to share whatever it was they shared and not shape that too much at the beginning. So for the first 2 elements of initial coding and focus coding, used a grounded theory approach just to see what type of themes and codes emerged from the data. And then from that, I took structural, social capital, and then looked through those themes that came to see where they fit in, and I fit them in those groups, and anything that didn't fit, I put into its own category so that could make room for additional insights from students. I did the same thing with community cultural wealth. And then finally with network counter storytelling, that one took much more of a traditional grounded theory where it just shaped from wherever the data came from. Though I have to say, because I was so focused on social capital and community cultural wealth, that definitely did feed into the process. Findings for that. So structural social capital. This question was wondering what are the different parts of social capital that came through the students' stories when they were sharing this in the campaign. So first they talked about these different resources, both direct and indirect. One of those was firsthand stories. So I love this part where they said, there's just something more about hearing it from them. A student talking about just hearing stories from another student really mattered. They also really valued mentorship, being able to see how other people could navigate stereotypes. And then this last quote here, I love, was a first-year student listening to other older first-gen students sharing their stories. And in that process of hearing their stories, they were able to see themselves as being a potential storyteller and a mentor themselves, saying, maybe one day I'll be able to do that too. Students also talked about different spaces that they tried to access these resources. So what I thought was interesting is that, so several of the students that we were able to interview attended the same campus and went to the same intervention programs that helped to support first-gen students, and they had differing experiences there. So this student talked about how immediately when they went to their first-gen program, they felt a sense of belonging. They felt that they knew that where their people were. Yeah, another student who also attended that talked about how going to that cohort was nice, but they still felt so different and felt like they didn't connect, and they still didn't go home feeling validated. So students had different experiences with these university spaces and how it helped them. And a lot of them talked about how difficult it was having these traditional spaces of support being so compartmentalized. So I love this quote where one of the students, a group of students were talking about having these support programs, and the student remarked that, you know, at 1 o'clock you can be a person of color, and at 2 o'clock I'm going to go be queer, where they felt like they could only have different aspects of their identity represented at these different times or spaces. Additionally, multiculturalism was another theme that came out a lot, that having more nuance to the type of cultures that they have made it difficult sometimes to fully engage with these spaces. So students would often describe more non-traditional spaces where they found their network of resources. This student talked about how they felt like they really found who they were and their story when they left campus for a while and came back, because they were able to hear and experience other people's perspectives, and that helped them to really own their own view. Social media was a really common space where students would go to find a source of comfort. This student here talked about how leaving home was really difficult to be separated from family and friends, but when they were able to go on social media, they felt close or connected with that network. And then finally, there's a student who is affiliated with the campaign who gave an example of creating a non-traditional space, where he talked about how they really valued being able to discuss what it was like being a student of color at a predominantly white institution, but that most of the spaces to do that were highly organized and structured. And so they took it upon themselves to go and start their own podcast and share their own stories from that, and created their own non-traditional spaces. Finally, with regards to mobilization, key elements were safety and being able to mobilize and connect with people. And a lot of that, for example, this quote talked about being able to be vulnerable, which was so vital in being able to connect new people, but also made it difficult when students felt unsafe to express that form of vulnerability. Homophily came up frequently, where students would talk about being drawn or connected to other groups of students based off identities and experiences. Though this also was nuanced, homophily was elastic, and it depended on each student's experience. So for example, this quote here, the student talked about how they felt much more comfortable being around another group of students who are people of color, as opposed to being around white students. Whereas another student of color talked about how they found community regardless of race. They wanted to find it based off of a similar mindset. So for him, it was being able to be around students who are also first gen and from low income backgrounds. So there was this element of being able to connect off a shared experience, but also that sense of safety, that your identity is safe with the other group that you're with. And then they listed some of the things that were threats to safety that prevented their ability to mobilize. A few examples were with lack of representation, not being able to see other students that aligned with their identity, and this quote of the higher up you go, the less you see of yourself. They also talked about the importance of having faculty and professors who are of their same identity, so that they could feel though that they were aspiring to something, and they could see someone who looked like them in those same roles. And finally, they made comments about, I love this one, there are some courses that just can't be taught by white faculty. And the fact that not having representation in the instruction that aligned with the curriculum was really important. Imposter phenomenon came up frequently, where students felt as though they didn't belong on campus, and that they fell short of expectations, that weren't sure where those expectations came from. This student said, I felt like I had snuck my way into a prestigious institution where I didn't belong. And then there's also identity threat, which apparently I lost my quotes on those. I guess I apologize for that. So the last one's, oh, there it is. The final one was exploitation of student labor, and lots of students talked about how it was put on them to be able to address microaggressions, to be able to help teach their peers or faculty why what they were doing was racist or sexist or classist, and that was that labor was put on them instead of the administration and other students taking responsibility for it.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Just because since this is the, we have to stick to the schedule, are you able to maybe in about like 8 minutes or so?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Okay, community cultural wealth, I'll go quickly. From this, from analyzing student stories, all the different forms of capital came up that Yoso presented. I already addressed social capital, so that won't be addressed here. Familial capital was such a strong theme throughout that I unbundled it into 3 different types that align with different parts of Yoso's definitions. So there's network, generational, and cultural. And then beyond these, there were 3 additional forms of capital that emerged from the data. There's economic, positional, and perspective. And all these different forms of capital were presented in contradictory ways. So for example, this network form of capital, there is an interdependent type where students talked about how, for example, the student talked about graduating and the pride of her parents, and that stated that that she was so proud of her parents because with their time and effort to pay for my education, they earn every bit of my achievement, showing this interconnected network in achievement. On the other side of that, students would also express often frustration at not having more of an independent capital, stating that it was hard to take risks and steer yourself off of that path, whereas they saw a lot of their non-first gen peers being able to veer and adapt and pivot more. I'll skip over these ones so we can go to the last part. For network counter storytelling, just how did students view the value of network counter storytelling? I love this phrase about talking about it being an art of storytelling and the value that it holds. So they viewed storytelling as a way to have mentorship. They also viewed it as a way to be able to reflect on their own identity and find connection and homophily. And it was a way to be able to create community and belonging on campus. We're here talking about being able to be a part of a much bigger picture, the demographics at their school. They also discussed issues with silos and echo chambers. A student talked about, while they valued social media, it was also very easy to feel isolated if that was your only source of community. The student talked about the selective curation of content, and even though the campaign was able to put out those materials, if someone didn't want to hear it, they could just choose not to follow or to block it. And students also talked about how it could break down these silos. So it gave a chance to be connected and to learn about people who are different than themselves in a way that they maybe couldn't do in a physical sense or geographical barriers. And also talked about how it created a place to be able to build emotional connections with people, to understand other people and also to feel understood. And then they talked a lot about how can they bridge these barriers? How can they be able to implement change beyond just in this digital format? So to do that, they talked a lot about accessibility, and that was touted that social media was valuable because it was so accessible. They discussed their part in being able to spread the word, that students could have ownership and leadership in being able to spread these stories and have its impact. And they talked about how when there's enough stories shared and enough people hear it, and they reach the right people, which is an interesting concept, that it could create a call to action that could spread across the country, was the view that this potential could have in the network counter storytelling campaign. So, oh man, I don't know if I'd use my 8 minutes, but I'll go fast. From the discussion, first, I wanted to present contributions that this research provided to research and practice. First, this research produced novel methods for measuring and analyzing social capital within social media communities that I think that could be valuable for both practitioners and researchers in studying these networks. It also demonstrates the power of network counter storytelling in creating a space that students can have voice and leadership in creating change, and especially creating change within academic research and settings. Contributions to theory, there are 3 different aspects of theory that this research contributed to. First, it presented a different view to social capital, which I'm framing as mutualistic social capital. So a more traditional form of social capital is very unidirectional. This is a quote from Lin, who was the one that shaped even the research that I was using, where he viewed it as a transaction that was asymmetrical, where there was a social debt from the receiver to the giver, and it creates a very imbalanced system. In my perspective, mutualistic social capital puts people on the same level, and it shows, this is a quote from the campaign saying that first-gen students have new and refreshing perspectives, that they should see themselves as having different perspectives, gifts, and talents that are relevant and useful to the university. So being able to see a mutualistic sharing of capital. The second theory is this concept of intersectional community cultural wealth. From studying this, you can see how one's social capital shapes the type of community cultural wealth that they have. And within that, there's nuance between how that capital is shaped in both dominant and non-dominant forms. So within a different context, you bring in your cultural capital and you can determine what aspects of your capital are more centered and which are pushed more to the margins, and then be able to understand the type of capital that provides you. This is really valuable to create a more nuanced lens to community cultural wealth and how that is impacted in different systems. And then finally, with respect to network counter storytelling, we use those concepts of community cultural wealth for students and understanding that each student has their own types of capital that are shaping what their community cultural wealth is. So we have our little orange one here, and then over here, different type of capital. So they each have their own community cultural wealth, but they're able to connect together through storytelling and build a shared connection and homophily, which are used through storytelling resources. These can be facilitated through spatial resources, such as like a physical setting in a classroom or at a mentorship program. However, being able to broaden its impact, there's also spatial resources that are digital, like this networked campaign, where students who maybe aren't able to be in those physical spaces can also still connect and share stories and swap that capital amongst themselves. So I want to finish with this final quote from another student in the campaign. They said, first-gen college students are the leaders of a century-long game of catch-up. But if we stay motivated while acknowledging each other's struggles and providing systems of support, the gap will quickly close. Can I do a quick thank you? I feel like I'm at like the part where, you know, like the people get an Academy Award and they only have 30 seconds to thank people, but I want to thank people really quick. I really want to thank Ethan and Lauren and Joe. This couldn't have taken place without you. So thank you so much to my committee for going with all the pivots and turns that I had with this research, and also being able to embrace the innovation of this current dissertation format long before it was forced upon academia. I love that we were able to connect from so many different places and regions that wasn't even really considered in most higher ed institutions until about a month ago. And I thank you for embracing that innovation. And then my LSC community, and especially, even though he's not here right now, my husband and my 2 kids who are out walking so that I can give this presentation. This has been for them. So thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kristi. That was completely and totally beautiful. So now is the time where we turn it over to comments and questions and feedback. And so I'd love to start with, you know, Lauren or Ethan or Tasha. Do you have any comments or questions or feedback? Not that if you have something along the way that this is the only time, you know, just wanted to open it up if you wanted to, if you had any initial thoughts.
I told them there is no pressure for talking, but also feel like if you have it, it would be, I mean, this is all through my perspective of the campaign, and if you have your own thoughts on, you know, how this differed or how it was for you guys.
And yeah, no pressure to speak either. If anyone wanted to jump in, that's okay. Okay, so we'll circle back around and see if there are any thoughts from those who are directly involved. Now let's move on to Mr. Salcedo. Do you have any feedback, questions, comments?
Yeah, I mean, just off the bat, kudos and bravo, Kristi, and also a special shout to Ethan and Lauren. I miss seeing the students being removed now from the institution world, but I just can't believe how much has happened and transpired since first meeting Kristi with the idea. Thank you, Dr. Bertrand, for being the connector for us, and it's just been a pleasure to really sort of see where you've taken this whole dissertation process. And I have a lot of, I think, questions and comments, because I think in reading the dissertation and hearing you present right now, it just elicited for me a lot of ways that you can serve as a bridge to, you know, student affairs practitioners at this institution, and frankly, any other institution who's willing to listen and really center the voices of first-gen students and marginalized students. But for me specifically, for Midwestern University, I think it would be of great value to not only connect it back with the staff of this department, of which the Bright Mentorship Program is sort of overseen, but I think of, for example, meeting with admissions, enrollment management, who are often very interested in highlighting and centering stories, especially from a recruitment lens, but I think they often don't do it justice. As you noted, you know, there might be good intentions behind wanting to reach out to underrepresented students, but if they're not at the table or part of this design of whatever campaigns are, then they're gonna miss the mark, right? And so admissions, I could see value for faculty. When we think about elements of diversity and inclusion and just being mindful to the cultural wealth that students already bring, you know, when they start at the institution. And then alumni engagement. And then one last one, advancement, because the Bright program, mentorship program, is partially funded through an external grant. And I think they're often interested in seeking ways, innovative ways, I should say, of how to, you know, award funding to support, you know, interventions that work and are not really sort of perpetuating these negative stereotypes of marginalized students, but really doing the opposite, which I think you've highlighted so well, again, in partnership with your internship team. So I'll stop there, but yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you so very much. This is just random, but let's start with committee members. Do either one of you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in, just to kind of, I think, because I was thinking along the same lines in terms of initial feedback that Joseph had. So, but fantastic job, Kristi. I appreciate your presentation. And I think, you know, some of the graphics that you included, like one of the last ones where you showed the relationships and they were colored, I think it had the homophily on it. Like things like that, I think if you're creating like maybe a quick snapshot to get your point across would be fantastic to include to those administrators to kind of illustrate your point really quickly. But I think the graphics that you created for your presentation are fantastic. So, and that are included in your dissertation, the figures, I think really help to illustrate your points really well. So that was done really well. And then also just wanted to mention, yeah, I think just the fact that Lauren and Ethan are here and are here to support you and are have been so participative in this research, it's just, I think it speaks volumes that they're here. So I think that's incredible, and I'm excited by that and have just been excited by your work. So I do have some questions, but I'll let everybody give a little bit of feedback and then we can kind of maybe dive into some specifics.
Sounds great, thank you. Dr. Foucault-Wells?
Sure, yes, thank you for sharing your work with us, Kristi, both in the written dissertation and this presentation, which I agree was smart and also beautiful. Well done. I enjoyed hearing about the work. I do have a few small questions. I would be excited to hear about next steps and how you're going to translate this into practice in particular, and I think the research trajectories are a little more obvious to me. And I will hint at my question. I would love to see more. You teased us a little bit with additional details on network analysis. So I would love to hear more about that when the time for additional follow-up questions is here.
Feel free right now. That's
okay. All right. Yeah. So I'm interested in, so I see, in your network chart, which was particularly lovely. So congratulations on that. I fully appreciate how challenging it is to get those things to look and tell the story you want them to tell. I see a pretty clear growth pattern, right? So we see the network getting bigger over time and certain nodes getting bigger. I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit more both how you use size and color to indicate what are we actually seeing there, and then how that growth maps onto your ideas about social capital in particular.
Yeah, okay, great. Let me pull up the visual because that would probably be easier to look at while I'm answering your question. Let me just go through the 200 slides that I have and find it. Okay, there we go. Let me hit the share button. Okay, you're talking about this one, right?
Yes.
So what I did for this, and granted, this is a very new field of study for me of network analysis, and especially in Instagram, there isn't a lot available for having to, there's not a lot of APIs or programs that can help with this. So I just scraped it all manually. I did one data scraping at the end of September, so about a month into the campaign. The same at the end of October, and then one at the very close of the intervention period. And from that, for example, in this graphic, the size of, so the central node represents the Instagram account. So I used an egocentric network for that. And then all the connecting nodes are followers of our account. The size of the node, or the circle that's there, is based off of the number of followers that person had. So for example, if they had 200 followers versus 2,000 followers, that would shape how large the circle was. The colors of the edges, the lines that connect from the central node to each of the followers, was based off of whether it was a reciprocal connection. So if they just followed our account, or if we followed them back, then that's in orange, so that there's a, I don't know, reciprocity in that connection. And then the colors of each of the nodes were based off of the type of account that it was. So going through each of the accounts, identify whether it was a public or private account, and then if it was a personal account versus a professional or organization account. So the organizational and professional ones were in green, with the darker green being a personal account, but that was done for professional purposes, and the lighter green being an organization, and then all the nodes in black are personal accounts. Granted, there's an element of subjectivity in that because I had to pull that through looking at the account and seeing how they labeled, but most of the accounts, is fairly easy to tell if it was an organization based off of the name, and you could look up about it. And then any of the ones that were personal account but professional typically laid that out in the caption where they discuss their bio. Oh yeah, there's one other element, and I'm not sure if I may even need some feedback on it because I was learning Gephi for the first time, which is how you present this, but the proximity of each of the nodes to the central node of the Instagram account was calculated by different aspects of each node's connection to the Instagram campaign. So that included the length of time that they had been following the account, which I marked from each of these time markers, how long they'd been there, whether we refollowed, whether we followed each other, and there's one other metric that was used in there, and that based off how close the node was to the central one.
Very nice, thank you. So given the patterns that you see, can you connect anything from the network analysis to your assessments of social capital, the growth in different types of social capital?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard in some senses because this is so early on in a campaign, and being able to like, you know, make predictions of the trajectory of it would be difficult because it's just a few months, but you can see a fairly consistent linear growth in the number of followers to the campaign over the course of the intervention period. And I think with regards to social capital, if I had more time and could go through, I would love to be able to evaluate each of these different connections and determine, were these ones that we engaged in conversation through direct messages, or how many of these, you know, created posts, or did we eventually reach out and then they shared a resource of a story with us. So I think that would be an effective way to start using this network to measure how these different forms of social capital are present.
Great, thank you. I had one more, it's a very small question. So I was curious how you operationalized REACH. So I noticed not in this presentation, but in the dissertation, you had lots of different kinds of engagement that could happen. So I was interested in particular that REACH variable. What does that actually mean to have a big REACH versus a small REACH?
Yes, so REACH was pulled directly from Instagram Insights, and so it's a metric that they already provide, and for them it's measured based off of the number of unique accounts that had visible contact with the post. So I think that they don't really provide a lot of definition beyond that because it's Instagram and they don't give a lot of information, but I think from that it means that either they looked at the account, it pulled up in their search feed at some point, but somewhere where eyes could be able to see the account, but it doesn't give nuance according to that. So that's where REACH came from, was that number. And then I tried to break down things that could facilitate that REACH. So looking to see if hashtags or mentions had an effect on that. And then also to see if REACH then could influence connections to indirect resources. So to other follows or other comments that could be made.
Thank you. That makes sense. All right, my last question from me. So in your assessment, what was more important was for the kind of benefits of this, of engaging with this project for the students? Was it the act of producing the stories? Was it the audience engagement, or having the audience, or some combination of the two?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. I might even ask, I mean, I can share what my thoughts were, but Ethan and Lauren could probably speak to that more. What was the most beneficial part? So for me, as we were doing the interviews, I think one element that I loved was, it was actually in a focus group interview that we were in, Ethan and Lauren and then another student, and the student talked about how they shared one of the stories that Ethan and Lauren had put up there that was about a student who was undocumented, and she shared that story with another friend because that was also their same experience. And I don't know, for me in that conversation, like being able to hear someone say like, oh, I looked at this story that you guys were able to put up and I was able to get utility out of it and also provide it for someone else that we wouldn't have been able to get connected to. That for me was where I saw a lot of the benefit, but I don't know, I might turn to Lauren and Ethan to see like, what do you think was the most like beneficial part of the storytelling?
I would say, I think how the stories were shared and like the act of like seeing them and reading them, I think that was a really big thing, because I noticed like a lot of the quotes that you used really talked about like how it has like the power to make people feel like understood and that kind of thing. And I think that was a really big component of seeing other people that have similar identities and similar experiences. I think that kind of, it's like, it makes you feel like you're not alone. And I think that's what I noticed a lot of people were saying. So I think that was a really big thing about it.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like I think a lot of the people that we interviewed were like friends and colleagues through like diversity programs or just in general. And I think like learning through these stories, like a much deeper context, like the impact it's had on them and like the networks that they've built around, I think like learning a lot from that was really beneficial.
Thanks, everyone. I will pass the baton to the next the next questioner.
Before it's passed, I wanted to ask you really quick, for any of your questions, are you recommending, you know, for instance, changes in the methods to add more description of network analysis or how that was done? Or
Oh, sure. The only minor change I would recommend is just in the kind of captioning around the network graph, to just make it a bit clearer what we're seeing there and how it's working, and what we're meant to take from it. It is a bit self-evident, but I didn't get all, you know, like the length of the ties and stuff like this.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll jump in, but then of course we'll turn it over to all kinds of to anyone who has more feedback. And I know Dr. DePold, you said that you have some other feedback. Well, first of all, Kristi, your dissertation and this presentation was absolutely beautiful, not just in its appearance, but I mean beautiful at its core. And it's truly innovative, just like you were saying. I mean, the way that you brought theories together and you proposed new theories, and it was truly incredible. I mean, in the final wheel graphic with, you know, showing the dualistic nature of the different forms of capital, it's a major contribution. So I have some comments on some minor things, you know, for changes, and then one question related to one of the comments. So these are all really minor, but just in chapter 2, for when you talk about community cultural wealth, if you could give a description of the different types, just define them in there. And you also have that in your chapter 4 as you go along, which is great, but you could have them up front in chapter 2 to give us, you list them, but then you could also define them. And yeah, I have a list of little things. And then on the actual document, I have some little typo type things, but I'll just say kind of the bigger the things, but again, they're small, they're very small. So there was that in chapter 2. In chapter 3, the bigger things are, if you could describe the intervention more, kind of give us a breakdown of what you did at different times. There's the intervention section. If you could add some more information about that. You know, you could even use your presentation today as a model of that. So just to, you know, for instance, the podcast interviews and how many podcasts were released during the campaign and things like that. And then, yeah, more information about your coding. So on page 66, more information on how you coded the direct storytelling resources. And on page 72, more information about how you coded basically in that section called analyzing content from the net ethnographic screening. So for instance, you could include examples of codes, things like that.
Okay, great. I knew that was going to be one.
Yeah, this is all minor and small. Also in chapter 3, some people put it in chapter 5. It's your choice. I mean, I kind of prefer chapter 3, but it's up to you. Like a limitations section.
Oh yeah. As you can tell, I was down to the wire. I had the whole thing but hadn't edited it yet, so I just didn't. There are lots of limitations.
I appreciate that call. Yeah, and so those are, and then I have a question which is related to, whatever your answer will be kind of related to the other recommendation. So in chapter 5, you talk about contributions of research and practice. I'd like to ask, what were the contributions to research and practice specifically related to higher ed and first generation students? And I know that that was really presented in your presentation, but if you could just, you know, kind of give an overview.
Yeah, I would say, so I did, and I had mentioned this before, I think I included it in the dissertation. I feel very strongly about putting more effort into merging the idea of research and practice, and the contributions influence both. I think we silo research and practice so much that is detrimental. So I would on a more like meta concept, I feel like the research helps to address that whole issue of being able to bring together research and practice more and realize that they go hand in hand. More specifically to the content of the research, I feel like the framework of network counter storytelling, one is an effective way for research to be able to know how to more effectively bring first-gen student voices and student groups that get pushed to the margins, or faculty that get pushed to the margins, as a way to be able to incorporate them in research, and also be able to create effective ways to implement with practice on campus. So for example, having a program that's already set up to support first-gen students, and then being able to recognize, you know, if we're able to help support, use our resources to support developing a space for students to connect and be able to share stories and own that, and not, I think in higher education, we like to take over and being able to recognize and find ways to know how to step back and see that power a little bit, and just know that we don't have all the answers as faculty. Like, I can give an example of how this played out in our very campaign, and Ethan and Lauren can tell you about this. But when we were first starting to put out the post, and I would ask them like what time they were going to put the post out, I kept like recommending to put it out around like 10 or 11, you're saying 10 or 11 o'clock in the middle of the day, because from other work that I had done on social media campaigns, that was like a key time to be able to reach the audience that we had. But my audience in that group were primarily parents, and that was the time. And then we realized when we look at the data later on that that was like the worst time for us to be posting, because that wasn't when students were on social media at all. So that was an example of like my own implicit bias and my own experience, and saying, no, this is how it's done. And then Ethan and Lauren being like, actually, this is the best time. So I feel like if we can take that micro example and then just apply it in higher ed, we'd be a lot better off.
Thank you. So if you were going to give, I know this goes more toward the practice side, but if you're going to give concrete recommendations, you know, what was mentioned to staff, faculty, alumni engagement, and, you know, student affairs practitioners, like, so you would say create a space for the student run where they can share their stories, and anything to add to that? Or,
you know what, that's a great, I need to think on it a little bit more, but I feel like the most important elements is in every aspect of decision making, whether it's curriculum, whether it's a student program, anything, that the decision makers include students who will be affected by that. So I think that would be one concrete thing there. And then, but I think you can't just have that, because there's still power dynamics involved in that context. And so there's some element of being able to create a safe space for being able to communicate, for being able to leverage their own power against these power dynamics. So, and that's something I think I would need to like talk more with students and faculty about, to figure out what is the most effective way to be able to not just make space for students, but create space that where they can effectively mobilize their capital.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's my recommendation for chapter 5. I'd like to see concrete recommendations for change. Oh, I see maybe Dr. DePold nodding. I don't know. Okay, concrete recommendations for change for practice at higher education institutions. You know, what would you tell them? You know, people are gonna be wanting some really concrete lists of recommendations. And of course, since this is within the dissertation framework, these have to be stemming from, so, you know, you can say the following recommendations stem from my research. My research suggests this, that, and the other. In addition, however, with it, you know, you can include insights based on informal conversations that are outside the research. You know what I mean? Like, that's not unallowed, but just make sure that, you know, you're saying, here are the recommendations that are stemming straight from my research. My research is suggesting that you do A, B, C, and D. And that, you know, and in addition, you know, from other informal conversations, other research, et cetera, I suggest this, that, and the other. So that's it for me. Before returning to Dr. DePold, did anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, all right, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was nodding. That was one thing that I think that there's more potential for are those concrete recommendations. And I mean, even to maybe a clearer connection, I mean, you talk about like previous interventions from other researchers in chapter 2. So the recommendations that they've recommended based on theirs and how those might overlap with your own. The other thing I would think too is thinking about scope, because it seems like this has just really been housed in more of the like social side of campus, but I think there's opportunity to integrate it into the academic side too. So I think that's just something to see if there are implications out there, but I do think that concept could also translate really well to building community within academic departments too. So something to consider. And then my question for you would be, it is an understatement to say that you have a lot of research here and a lot of data to share. So I think your presentation, even that, you did a wonderful job of presenting the overview of all of the information you have. But let's say, you know, we're your governing board or your institution's governing board. What would be the highlights, you know, the maybe 1 to 2 minute highlights of either your findings or the most meaningful thing that you found that you think, if I've only got a minute to share the most important things, like what are the things that you're going to stand out and push along?
Oh man, that's not easy. I should work on my elevator pitch, I'm realizing. You know, there's a group at Northwestern that focuses on multimodality and how that can be addressed in equity. And I presented this to them, and I felt like that was a really good experience, because they asked a similar question, like, what is the key takeaway? Like, if you had to pick one thing. And that was hard because there's so much stuff. But I felt like the overarching story was this concept of counter stories being in networked spaces, and just the power that's there. So it is this concept of network counter storytelling, because I feel like everything stemmed from this. It's this combination of being able to speak an experience that is counter to what is mainstream and what is viewed as sometimes correct, and having ownership of that, but not only being able to do that, but to do that in a way where those stories can be held as a resource and turned to later on, and also being able to do that and build a network from that. I think that there's something really powerful in that, and we've seen how quickly that can, even like as I was writing this dissertation, I imagine you probably read it, but everyone's education is being shifted to digital. And then I read about the students in China who had that app that was supposed to be for homework, and within like a day's time, they had all given it 1 star so that the app couldn't be used anymore. And so they didn't have to do homework because the app crashed. And I was just thinking about like, wow, this is like playing out in real life, like this network of students who typically don't have any power in that type of setting, who were able to use technology and connect and just like, I don't know, make a statement. I'm sure it was very frustrating for the app creators, but faculty, but I don't know. I feel like that's the crux of it, is this networked ability to for outside groups to shape mainstream structures.
Yeah, and it's certainly very timely, right? For you, I would imagine, like you're seeing the shift, and even I think if you were, I think you would see even more support for your concepts, and it wouldn't be. I think when you started this research, it was probably something that was novel, and this is totally different, and now it's going to be more of the forced like norm, at least hopefully long term as well. So I think kudos to you for having the foresight to see this importance and already start this work. The other thing, let's see, there were a couple things that were just really fascinating to me. The idea of this digital activism and the role that could play, because I do think that we see a lot of students who are digitally active, but this idea of digital activism is totally different. So I like that that's included in there and part of your narrative. So just a comment on that. And then, I mean, thinking, I guess, in terms of like talking about the timeliness, if you were to rerun the study, knowing what you know now and in current conditions, what would you do differently to improve maybe on your research now that you've got 1 round under your belt?
That's a great question. Well, first and foremost, I would, I don't know if I can do it wholeheartedly because I'm thick-headed, but I would probably listen even more to the students who are running it, even though I thought that I was. I would do that. I think in some ways, and maybe Ethan can speak to us, I think something that was difficult at first was that I was coming into this research project with an idea of what I needed to do in order to graduate, but also something that I wanted to do because I'm passionate about. And, he and Lauren came in for some matching reasons, but probably their own, and then trying to figure out how to do that together. And also, I wanted so much to be able to like let them have autonomy on it. But I think at the very beginning, I was like, okay, go, like, make a campaign. And they were kind of like, okay, I don't know, where do you want? So I realized that just giving autonomy wasn't like actually helpful, like being able to know how to be engaged, but also know how to step back. That's something I would try to be able to implement better and get more feedback on how to do that. I would say the one thing that is very interesting about, and the timeliness of everything going on, is that it's interesting that my research project and how it was conducted is almost completely removed from the current situation with the pandemic, because I had to conduct all the interviews through Zoom calls. It was all through social media. There were some elements of meeting on campus, but we also met through, like, Ethan, Lauren, and I met through Zoom as well. So there's some element of it that is kind of cool to see that it's not impeded by this very dramatic change that's happening to the world. But I would definitely try to figure out ways to more effectively step back, but also feel like I'm being supportive. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll hold for there, and if we've got more time, I'll ask more, but I want to make sure everyone else has time to ask questions too. So.
Thank you. Other questions or comments along the lines of anything that we've talked about or anything that we haven't talked about?
I might even ask, and Ethan, you don't have to answer, but kind of the question that I got of what I could do to do better, what would have been better, like more helpful for you? Am I allowed to ask questions? Am I just reached out of people?
Yeah, for sure. I think also Lauren's internet cut out, sorry. But I think like one thing that we learned during this, like a lot of it was learning while we were implementing the research and like doing everything. So I think like if we went back into like having a solid plan from the beginning, just 'cause I think we did learn a lot during it and from it, and like we're making changes as we go. Like Kristi talked about, like when to post, like that was like a big thing, just trying to like figure out during. So I think just like everything we've learned so far, like implementing it at the beginning and having like a solid plan going into it.
Yeah, going forward, I mean, it's kind of hit a hiatus because of writing a dissertation, and you know, you guys are kind of in a busyness of the semester, but going forward, I feel like we have like a good, we have some traction now.
Most definitely.
Other comments or questions? Any recommendations from now the two of you who are at Midwestern University? I'll put that in quotes. or well, one formerly of Midwestern University. So when I was asking about the concrete, basically the implications of this study for recommendations, you know, if either one of you wanted to answer, what recommendations do you see from this study that you would pass along to people at the university?
You know, something as I read through this, Kristi, that kept coming up. So I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago at this institution, there was a push to create a sort of campaign around pride in being a first-generation student. There was talk at the time to even loop in faculty and staff who shared that experience of being a first-gen college grad. And I think that was at a time where there was a larger sort of percentage of undergrads who identified as first-gen. And then it sort of went nowhere. But the idea behind it was how can we sort of celebrate and being part of like committees that were trying to meet with students. I do recall there were students that were invited, you know, to present on their first gen experience. But I think I was struck by how even despite, you know, bringing in, you know, just a small percentage of students, I think a lot of people are still hung up on assumptions that we often will make about the first gen experience. And what I liked about your research was that you were already citing in your lit review, even all the sort of theories that, you know, again, perpetuate deficit narratives. And so you being able to do that in a very thoughtful way to call out how, you know, there's so many interventions out there that exist and where are they sort of missing the mark. And I think a lot of times they don't hold up this mirror to seeing that this is all, you know, latent with deficit approach and deficit mindset. And so I thought it was refreshing to see that. And I think my recommendation would be that in any presentation to an administrator, faculty, anyone in the higher ed world, I would say really be honest and transparent about, and you have the data to showcase that, but I think just being honest about how, you know, what's not been working, right? And so let's take a step back from that. And yeah, I think it's not enough just to create space for stories, but it's also to educate, because even students, I think, have sort of, without, you know, that education behind understanding what deficit narratives are and taking a strengths-based approach to it, we're all going to sort of continue the same old, same old.
Anyone else want to add along those lines?
I think going off that, like a lot of what we learned was just listening to students and what they need, rather than just like the university trying to make the changes and implement what they think is best. Like us actually having a feedback and a voice in university policies and changes and things like that.
I would also add, so I thought it was interesting. I don't think I was able to include it as much in the dissertation, but there was also this element of how we were trying to spread awareness of the campaign and different engagement. And that was exciting, but also very difficult. Like you had to tread carefully. If, for example, like Ethan had a professor who was working with us and was really excited about the campaign, and I think it was in one of our meetings with her, she talked about sharing it out in an email to other faculty, and then suddenly kind of had some reservations about like, oh, actually, you know, does it mention our university? Does it say this stuff? And that was an interesting nuance of, one, the benefit of having a campaign that isn't like stuck in the structures of the university, because you can skirt around those barriers, but also the difficulties there are in actually being able to reach positions of power, those traditional forms. And I don't know if that stood out to you at all, Ethan, in that conversation, but I kept thinking, oh, there's so many like useful voices this could go to, but just sending it out sometimes isn't ineffective, or could sometimes be harmful for those who are sharing the stories or sharing the campaign.
Yeah, I think kind of that like they need to be like ready to listen. Like us just bringing this change to them won't actually like do anything unless they're willing to make the change and kind of interact with it.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that might be just a sign of the institution itself. You know, in my current role, working with a number of other institutions in the state, a lot of them being public, a lot of them being community colleges, I've been really heartened by sort of the different approaches and how, you know, admin and leadership are really embracing the student voice. So yeah, I just, for what it's worth, it might just be sort of relegated to that. You know, and I wonder, even would this campaign look, I wonder about how different it would look depending on the makeup of the campus environment. Like if this was at a minority serving institution, if this is where first-gen students made up the majority of students, like how this would sort of play out. But I think you never want to sort of discount the power of stories.
Thank you for speaking on that, because that's something that in some ways I wish I was like a year further down on the campaign, because I felt like the stories that we got, we represented quite a few different institutions, but we had large chunks at where, you know, where Ethan is situated, and then another institution that collaborated, and then kind of speckled around. And I thought it would be, if they had a larger sample size and heard these stories, it would be great to be able to kind of unbundle what is the experience at like a predominantly white institution, or, you know, in this geographic region, or for these students. And I would love to be able to see that more and hear those stories.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Dr. DePold, I think that you had more feedback and questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything that needed to, that I needed to discuss. I think they're all like minor things after what we've already talked about, so we're good.
Okay. That sounds good. Dr. Foucault-Wells, any other recommendations for changes or questions, comments?
I do not have any more recommendations for changes. I am curious where, so this is really important research with both practical and theoretical findings. Where are you at in terms of sort of preparing the follow-on reports? I imagine not very far, so because you've just finished this. But I guess maybe it's not even a question for you to answer, but to plant the seed, there's you know, at least one strong theoretical paper to pull out about the storytelling aspect. There's clearly lots of policy or practice implications. So that's not my area of expertise, but you know, some brief to give off to universities. And then I would suggest there's also a really interesting methods piece here that I could see being placed in kind of a social media communication methods journal. So since that's my area of expertise, I would encourage you to follow up on that too. So how do you combine the netnography with the network analysis and the, you know, the kind of content analysis of the posts, and how do you do that well? One thing that's really commendable in your work is the care that you took not only with joining the methods together, but situating them very specifically in a population. So I'm sure you've noticed in a lot of social media research in particular, we kind of forget about the fact that social media, you know, even the same platform is very different to different users. It's very context dependent. And even for the same user, it's different depending on what they're saying and who they're trying to reach or what kind of feedback they're getting. So there's something really lovely in here that you've done. So I wanted to lift that up as a third possible publication or follow-on piece.
Thank you. Yes, that is, I will probably be reaching out to all of you for help on that, because that is the next step, and it's a step, those are steps I'm not as familiar with, so I would love guidance on that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other final thoughts or questions or feedback, suggestions for change? Okay, is that a no? I think that's a no. Okay. So now comes the part where if we were in person, the committee would ask folks to step out of the room, but instead I'm going to do breakout rooms. Hi, let me be the first to congratulate Dr. Johns.
Yay!
We were in there just praising your dissertation and just saying it's really, I don't know exactly how to phrase it. It's in a class of its own. It's not, I mean, it's not even in the regular sphere. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. Yeah.
That deep breath.
Anyone want to say any words to Dr. Johns?
I would love to just lift up the fact that not only is this excellent, it's excellent in the worst possible circumstances, right? I mean, I know that you have young kids at home. I know that you were distance learning this whole time. Like, I mean, you had so many challenges on your plate, and like you delivered a thing that was so extraordinary. I hope that you can be proud not only of becoming a doctor, so welcome, but doing it under extraordinary adversity. So congratulations. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for letting me be involved in it. I'm just thrilled for you.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I think in terms of just the amount of information that is useful for our field and enclosed in one like 200-page document, it's just the way you put it together is phenomenal. And yeah, so enjoy this feeling of accomplishment because this is impressive, and I'm just you know, happy to be able to support you on this journey. So congratulations, Dr. Johns.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please just jump in if you'd like. No pressure though.
Yeah. Sorry, Tasha.
Sure. Congratulations. Beyond amazing. Was a beautiful thing to witness, especially as a PhD who's going to defend next May. The example that was presented, the presentation, it was so rich and blown away. A lot. It captured a lot, even grounded in theory and what was produced out of it, and on time, topic, method, approach. So congrats.
Thank you, Tasha. Thank you. And I don't know, did you just do your proposal defense?
Yeah, I did mine on Friday. So
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say, on behalf of like me and Lauren, we're very honored to have worked on the presentation. We're very proud. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks, Ethan. And I don't know if he showed you, but Lauren is there on his phone.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would just echo everything everyone said. Congratulations, Dr. Johns, and I can't wait for others to, you know, read your research, to hear your presentations and be moved in the same way. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
And yeah, I just want to echo everyone's. Just like what Tasha said, I was blown away by the dissertation, by the presentation, and every step of the way. You taught me so much. I kept learning. I mean, you helped me see counter storytelling in a different way, you know, as it could be networked. definitely the expertise in that dissertation was so far beyond what I have. You taught me so much. I mean, even in the lit review chapter, you taught me so much. I had never seen the different, that much in depth about even social capital. It's been an honor to walk with you along the way. Yeah, oh, and just to echo what Dr. Foucault-Wells was saying, I mean, you pulled this out and like the worst circumstances possible, and you just did it. So anyways, congratulations, Dr. Johns.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Sorry, I'm a little emotional.
You're allowed. Normally we would like hug and stuff.
I had to stop myself from getting, yeah.
I'm like kind of sad that, you know, I sort of want to have this on like a quarterly basis, this video chat.
Yeah. Well, now we just hang out socially. That's
Oh,
yeah.
Less stressful for me.
Exactly. Exactly.
Any thoughts that you want to share, Kristi?
Oh, I feel like my mental state is in a place where I don't know if I'm very coherent at the moment, but I just, I think it's, I realized the more I studied this, the reason why social capital was so important, because I changed my life and my trajectory, and I feel like this is just, I feel like I was living my study in a lot of ways, and you guys have been some of the in the most flattering sense possible, the key nodes in my in my life, and I'm just very grateful. Thank you, and thank you for going with me with all the different twists and turns of the study. So thank you.
Definitely. And I didn't mention this, but it's a pass, obviously.
Oh, okay, good.
Goes without saying. Well, does anyone else have anything to add?
I would like to encourage you to take some time off.
Yeah.
Just like a whole week without opening your laptop, or, you know, sign the papers or whatever. But, yeah, take advantage of it. It's a tough time for everyone, and you earned some downtime.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely.
I will.
Incredible. All right, well, let's all, you know, celebrate in our own way for Kristi, and also Tasha. Congratulations to you both. Dr. Johns, and I just wish you all well and lots of health and you know, wellness at this time. And it's been great. This has been a wonderful, and because of the amazingness of the dissertation, actually a shorter defense than the norm. Anyways, wishing you all well. Be well, folks.
Thank you. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you. All right.